Greetings, Tezos Nation. I'm Stu from the Tezos Commons. Joining me today is Mason Edwards, Chief of Staff at the fabulous Tezos Foundation. As always, we'll be giving away a Tezos branded Nano Ledger to one lucky viewer during the stream. If you'd like that viewer to be you, keep an ear out for our keyword later on during the stream. Hi, Mason. How are things in London?
Hey, yeah, doing pretty good. It's cold. It's always cold in London, but yeah, things are great.
Awesome. To get the ball rolling, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your personal crypto journey?
Yeah, sure, of course. So how far back should we go?
As far as you want.
As far as I want. All right. So I grew up in the south of Spain. Not sure it's super relevant, but it was a wonderful place to grow up. A little bit warmer here than here in London. Studied at Cambridge, engineering. Didn't really take a journey directly into blockchain. That would have been the time when everything would have started to have been happening. I had a bit of a hardware focus, self-taught programmer. Did a couple of startup things. Eventually ended up at Palantir, and then later Google, and now here. So I'd say like it's been a super interesting journey. Always kind of in tech. Often at the intersection between like tech and business use cases, and trying to find like what the perfect marriage there is. But definitely newer to the blockchain space. I mean, obviously, like I think you can't be in tech and not have like followed it with keen interest. But in terms of like a formal role or really doing something, like this is a new thing for me.
What inspired you to make the move from Google into crypto?
Yeah. So like Google into blockchain. I mean, it's Google's a fantastic place to work. There's no doubt about that. And I had a very similar role to the one today in terms of like title and the kind of activities I would do. But I had this like yearning for an adventure. I knew that while I'd like kept up to touch with the tech, I had not been like as involved as I would have liked to have been. And so that was in the back of my mind. And when an opportunity comes to kind of course correct and to start to get really involved in the tech and see what's really there, I mean, it was just very exciting, and it was something I just wanted to be a part of.
Very cool. And now you're the Chief of Staff with the Tezos Foundation. What do you do on a day-to-day basis in that role?
Yeah, right. I'll let you know when I find out. I think like if you look at some of my former titles, I've had a few ambiguous titles before, so it's no difference there. And it's kind of similar to what I did at Google, in that I think it's important to find the projects, the initiatives, things that are going on that you think are going to have a lot of impact, that require more bandwidth, and you just basically add bandwidth to that. Like I consider myself like a search resource. If something needs to get done and I can add value in that way, like I'm there, I'll rock up and I'll help. But I tend to be like a little bit ephemeral. I'm not always on a thing.
Okay. So in terms of increasing bandwidth for Tezos, what kinds of projects are you most excited to see built on Tezos?
Yeah. So I'm a huge gamer. I wish I had the time to play as much as I used to. But therefore, for me, the parallels between the gaming space and what we've all known as being great games that we love to play and the way we interact with them, to what the blockchain can bring to some of that stuff, I think that's really exciting. I think it's exciting in a bunch of directions. Everything from like very blockchain heavy centric games that don't resemble the kind of games you would have played before, other than they're fun, to like the games we play today, but they're being embellished by the technology, and they found ways to like bring more value to the gamers. Like a good example of that is like the Ubisoft project. So I think that's super exciting. I don't think it's entirely just my bias being a gamer. I think there's a lot of legs to the technology's use case in that direction. But I have to put my hand up and say that there is some bias there, being a gamer myself.
Well, Ubisoft is quite a big name, right? For those who might not be aware, can you tell us a bit about that collaboration?
Yeah. So it's called Quartz, I believe. And Ubisoft are essentially bringing NFTs to some of their games, starting with small use cases and growing out. And I think that's extremely interesting because we've always had skins in games. I think that's been around for a while now, and I think the idea of collecting those, and we all understand like why they're cool, and why that's like potentially a positional thing for you to have in a game, or you just like show it off, or it's just something that you want to basically like fly your flag. But then comes the question of ownership. And I think there's like two interesting directions there. One is like, it's very cool to own my NFT, my skin as an NFT outside of the game. That's really interesting. And I think it's interesting because like it adds a lot of value to what you can do with the NFT. But also because like for me, it represents a huge part of nostalgia. Like there's so many games I played back when I was younger and had more time to do it, where like it's almost as if they're just memories now. I have nothing to like go back and look at that time. NFTs are a great way to build a legacy and some nostalgia in that. So there's a few other cool things too, but I'm going to ramble if you let me go on too much.
Feel free. As you have a little bit of a background in cloud tech, as I understand it. Do you see parallels between existing cloud tech and what's possible with Tezos?
I see parallels, and I've been thinking about writing an article about this. So that's on my to-do list at some point in time. But I see a lot of parallels between the adoption of cloud and the kind of thesis that was driven by a lot of institutions and their executive teams that would look into cloud adoption and what they should do. I see a ton of parallels between that mentality and thought process to like some of the things you might see emerging in the blockchain world when adoption is considered. And I don't think that's because of parallels in the technology. Like they're inherently incredibly different.
Okay.
We hit them in the cloud computing is one thing and blockchain is another. There are some projects that try to overlap those things, of course. But I think what you see is that when an institution, a large organization wants to consider a technology for something that's critical to them, and that can be critical because it's the entirety of their business or because it's just a very critical function in their business, you need to think about your technology in terms of like a risk profile in that sense, right? And you won't want to build in a way that you are dependent on a singular source. So that's really interesting because let's take like cloud as the keystone example here. You're not going to say like, okay, we're going to put everything in Google Cloud Services. What you're probably going to do is build yourself a little kind of ecosystem of some AWS, some GCP, which is the Google Cloud, and probably some Azure, and like, hey, maybe some Oracle as well. Like you're going to kind of figure out what you need to have a spread so that you're not dependent on a single technology. And I think that's extremely interesting as well. Like, and it raises the question of, well, if we see dominance in one particular technology standard, like what's the second standard that's going to come along with that? And the other is kind of longevity. When you pick a cloud technology, you want to think very heavily about like, is this right for today? And is this right for tomorrow? Like, do I trust that my use cases will still match? And do I believe that like the technology stack that I'm building on is going to have longevity and that it can keep up to date? It can continuously, well, I mean, going to plug the word evolve in here. It can continuously evolve. And so I see parallels there too. And so like, it's still nascent, but I think there's a lot of thinking that I want to find some time to do to explore that idea a little bit more because I think there's something there.
So you mean when you plug the word evolve in there, that blockchain tech that sort of inherently evolves as it goes, particularly with Tezos,
Right. That's what yeah.
That would be an ideal way to match up your cloud tech, which should realistically also be evolving as things change, right?
Yeah, so I think there's to draw the parallels down to their conclusion, right? One argument might be, okay, so let's say that going back to my cloud example, but bringing it across to the parallel, like there's a choice of an EVM chain, right? Well, then you probably want to make sure that the other chain you choose is not EVM. So I think that's a very interesting point to be in, right? And I think the other side of like, can this update? Like, will it survive a fork? Does it have to fork? I mean, so far there have been some forks already out there, in the blockchain ecosystem that have had varying levels of impact. But if I was a CTO of like an incredibly important gaming company, I might want to think very carefully about whether I want to subject myself to that possibility. So I think that's from the kind of like longevity aspect that also is very interesting because it's no small feat to integrate these technologies, and you don't do it lightly.
Certainly not. This is all great stuff so far. I'm really excited to learn more. Before we get into the nitty gritty, I'd like to announce the Tezos branded Nano Ledger giveaway keyword and prep you for the world famous TezTalks lightning round. Are you ready for that?
Can you ever be ready for that?
Okay, today's giveaway keyword is !vote Ithaca. Please enter the keyword !vote Ithaca into the chat, and Nightbot will randomly select today's winner before the end of the stream. Okay, Mason, it's lightning round time. Remember, there are no wrong answers. This is just for fun so our listeners can get to know you a little better. Are you ready?
Let's do this.
Sushi or pizza?
Sushi. I do love pizza. Oh, I got to be quick. Okay, go.
No.
Sorry. Fire
You
away.
can expand a little bit.
Okay.
Simpsons or Family Guy?
Simpsons.
Excellent choice. Cats or dogs?
I can't. I have both a cat and a dog, and I'm going to get in the doghouse either way. Yeah, exactly. They could, and the cat plots. So.
Fair. Beaches or mountains?
Beaches.
True or false? Money buys happiness.
Never tried.
Name one
Probably
thing
false.
that you absolutely want to do before you die.
I want to overcome my fear of scuba diving with sharks.
That's the best answer I've ever heard to that one. The last place you traveled was?
Switzerland.
Lovely. In 5 words or less, how would your best friend describe you?
Oh, that's a hard one.
Okay.
Hopefully kind. Tenacious. Hard to get hold of. Too busy working, I guess. Funny, I'd like to think. Probably competitive.
Lovely. And finally, movies or video games? I think we know the answer to that one.
It's going to be video games, but it's even with my love of gaming, that is a hard one. I think movies are pretty fantastic, especially the right ones.
Right on. Excellent answers. This concludes the TezTalks lightning round. Let's get back into it. I'm curious, where would you say we're currently at in terms of getting to a place where blockchain and crypto are a real and practical part of people's everyday lives?
Yeah, wow. The hard-hitting questions.
Yep.
I think we're definitely at a point where they're real and practical. The everyday lives is the interesting part of this story, right? And I think we, from respect of technology, I doubt we've even scratched the surface of finding like all of the use cases that are going to exist. And adoption is just increasing massively. So I think we are a journey away from everyday lives, but then we can look back at like art and gaming, and I think like that's an example where I've seen even in the last 6 to 12 months like a tremendous movement for like people who'd never experienced blockchain technology, never interacted with it in any way, being able to do that. I had the pleasure of being at Art Basel, Miami, and watching people who'd never, they've never had a wallet, an address, they've never interacted with blockchain technology. They've kind of vaguely just entered into the world of like, what is an NFT? And within 30 seconds, they were able to mint one. And that's just so interesting and so compelling to see like, the usability increase and to find, these use cases emerge that really could be everyday things.
Yeah.
But, every person, every day, that's, we're not there yet.
Not quite. But I mean, with use cases like NFTs and like you've talked about with video games, it's looking quite promising for people to start getting involved and start experiencing this stuff, right?
To start experiencing the games.
To start experiencing what blockchain and crypto have to offer.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, like I alluded to before, like I love being at that intersection of technology, finding its use case and finding like, real value. And I really want to see what, game developers start to bring to the table. Because there's a lot in what we're already starting to do, but man, it looks so untapped. There's so much more. When you start to think about like, the game economies and the ability to do integrations there, when you start to look at, NFTs as more than just a skin, as something that has provenance that you've owned throughout the journey of your game, like, that starts to become extremely compelling. I once had the thought like, what if the ownership of a guild was determined by the owner of a particular sword NFT, and that sword NFT had provenance because you could see every owner that's ever had it before. I mean, like stuff like that. It seems simple, but it's just such a change and
Yeah.
it's such an interesting way to see like where this is going to go. So, I mean, this
What's
is a
the
shout out to every dev to start thinking about this and working on it, and I'll be there
Absolutely.
playing your games.
Well, what's the collectability / value of a skin, a well-known skin that's accomplished great things within the world of a prominent video game, right?
Right, yeah. Like, or a basic, no one ever, could care less common skin sword. But that was the sword that killed the final boss.
Yeah.
Like, what? It's gonna be a very different world. A very different gaming world, I should say. Or both. But I
Well,
don't
we
know.
thought we spoke to Brian David Marshall about this, who's working on
Interpop and Emergence.
Emergence, right? Sorry,
Yeah.
I drew a blank there. And he was speaking a little bit about this, that with an NFT an NFT that has utility within the world of a video game, that the ability to track back to where that NFT has been throughout its entire history and say, okay, this once belonged to this particular gamer, this particular emergence card was used by Brian David Marshall in such and such tournament, that there's enormous potential there in terms of collectability and value.
I mean, yeah, I mean the journey these NFTs have been on is something we've not been able to look into before. I mean, it's kind of happened in the real world.
Yep.
Like, I'm pretty sure you can get like a signed Magic card that was like
Absolutely.
owned by a professional player. But to be able to do that in a digital way and to be able to do it at scale and to like have real provenance versus like, did they really sign that? Like, that's it's super awesome. And I think trading card games is another example where NFTs have like barely scratched the surface of what they're going to do. And I'm pretty sure we're going to see some incredible things from Emergence.
You mentioned adoption.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of driving up adoption, moving towards this technology becoming a real part of people's everyday lives, what do you think we need to do in the space and in the ecosystem for us to get there?
Okay. I mean, here's the position we're at. Like, and I'm going to be a little general, that like a new technology has emerged, and I think a pretty incredible and well differentiated technology. And now we're going to ask like, okay, so what's going to take adoption of every person every day using the blockchain in some way? Well, it's going to be those innovators who take that technology and build the apps, the dApps that actually bridge the gap. So I mean, I can't tell you what use case it's going to be, or what like series of use cases more likely it's going to be, but it's pretty clear that that whatever they are, they're definitely going to be built. So if you're asking like what can people do, it's learn, dev, have cool ideas, find people, chat about it, like build things. Is that's how the computer revolution took off. That's how the software revolution took off. Building tools, for that example, has seriously compounding effect. One of the first things I ever did was a biotech company that had this idea as well, that one of the problems that existed in biotech for some time is that the scientists couldn't build their own tools. So like you might be like an incredibly talented biologist who is big into DNA sequencing, but you don't necessarily have like the Python skills to build an IDE or to like solve Git versioning for DNA sequencing. So like we're like, okay, what we need to do to really kickstart this revolution is to build the tools. And I think that mentality is true for blockchain tech as well. And we're extremely fortunate there's some fantastic tools in the Tezos ecosystem. But more and better is always a good thing.
So speaking of which, we've been seeing lots of traction on Tezos Foundation grants over the last year. It's been exciting to see kind of this explosive year for Tezos in terms of contract calls, partnerships, etc. For those who might be considering getting involved in this ecosystem, What's the process like to apply for a Tezos Foundation grant to help build those tools out?
Yeah, so I've not gone through the grant process myself, so I don't know the punch by punch of it, but I'd say visit the grant page. Have an idea, structure it well. Think very carefully about what's required to get that done and what the ask actually is. I always think demonstrating doing something and then asking for more is always a good strategy. And these are very generalized points because they're true for any example like this. But yeah, head over to the foundation's website and go through it would be the kind of best thing to do if you have a compelling idea. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think there was 230 million last time I checked, and 59% new. Like there's I have a look at the banner report. It's pretty impressive stuff.
You're saying when you talk about building something and asking for more, you mean it's better to develop it to a certain point, then approach somebody for a grant and present, this is what we have and this is what we'd like to do with it?
Well, it's like it's not always perfect to be like you can't always do that. But I think like as a general principle, it's always good to say like, okay, I want to achieve this like 10-mile out there goal. So like what exists at 5 miles? What exists at a mile and what exists like 500 meters? And like it's kind of always easy to say like, okay, at 500 meters, what do I need? Maybe you don't need very much. Maybe you still need a lot. Like it really depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. But I think like it's always an easier story to like lay it out like that and say like, okay, well actually I've done my 10 meters because I could do 10 meters, and I now would like to do 500 meters. Like that's always going to be a compelling story.
For sure. I mean, this space has seen its fair share of big ideas that never got off the ground, right?
I think every technology has seen its fair share
Of course,
of
of
big
course.
ideas. Yeah, but like I said before, right? Like I love the intersection of cool tech and it's finding this use case and its value proposition. So like it's similar to that. It's same with an idea, right? Like we think this is needed, we think we can do this. Always interesting to see and hear about.
Getting back to NFTs for a second, because it's obviously been big news. We've just been through kind of a giant growth cycle, kind of driven in in a to a fair degree by the emergence of the NFT as the first sort of big crypto centric consumer marketplace. Um,
Mhm.
and I think we've been given an interesting window into where this technology and these ecosystems are really at in terms of utility. How do you think the crypto community and the larger ecosystem has performed during this sort of use case?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by like performed.
Okay, so we've seen this marketplace emerge, and we've seen sort of these tools emerge into
Mhm.
that marketplace quite quickly. So go okay, well here's a new place where we're going to store NFTs. Here's a new place where we're going to sell them, that kind of thing. How do you think that the ecosystem performed in terms of meeting the emerging need?
Yeah, do I think the rate of innovation has been staggering. Um, you know,
Certainly.
Especially when you start comparing it to other forms of tech. I've had my time in sort of government-based tech as well, and yeah, that's definitely a very different pace. But if you look at like you know the wallet ecosystem, for example, and the continuous updates that I've seen there, and in terms of the ability to display and organize NFTs, and lots of smaller things that are happening that are making the experience better and better and better. Um, I think you're seeing an incredible amount of innovation and an incredible amount of technological change, not just to like the whole. Well, of course, it's the self-amending protocol with the on-chain governance, but like actually to the entire ecosystem and everything that touches all those different points. From I've seen marketplaces improve a lot, I've seen wallets improve a lot, I've seen the whole thing. So I think, well, I mean, there's always more, right? But what I see in terms of the journey someone goes on to use and interact with an NFT in the Tezos ecosystem, it's a great journey, and it's gotten better, and it just continues to head that direction.
Beautiful. So a few days ago, we saw the Tezos network fall short of reaching supermajority for the Ithaca upgrade during the exploration phase and revert back to the proposal phase. Clearly, like there's been a lot of contention around liquidity baking within the community, and we've seen a decent number of bakers vote against it. We can dive into liquidity baking specifically if you want, but I'm more curious as to your thoughts after the events of the past few days for Tezos governance moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, this is a seriously interesting topic, and where to kind of start is almost the question. So let's think. It's pretty awesome to see that the governance happens, right? And you don't have to love the outcome to love the fact that the outcome was decided by on-chain governance. And that is something that, like, in of itself is absolutely amazing. And then there's like a secondary layer there, which shows that like the liquid democracy is also kind of works, because it's not instantaneous. If you're with a baker, then your vote's kind of with that. It's not, you can't switch immediately, but you can see that if your baker doesn't vote in a way that you wanted them to, move. And if you just look at the volume of traffic that's moving delegations around, then that also suggests that it works in a twofold fashion. Not only is the on-chain governance able to do what it says on the tin, but also that people can redirect how they think the vote should go, and that's really, really cool. And so, like, it's really hard to, on a personal level, to look at it and say, was it a great thing or not? I don't know. It's for everyone else. It's for everyone to have their own opinion on. But I think the fact that the vote was able to take place is super, super cool. And if we talk a little bit about like Ithaca itself, yeah, it's a massive shame. Ithaca was great, and I think both components, both tender bake and also liquidity baking, and we can dive into that. But the fact that, as I said, the fact that the governance went through is the silver lining.
Absolutely, and it speaks to the sort of promise of the tech in terms of true decentralization and true democratization of this stuff, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
How would you describe the current state of the Tezos ecosystem as somebody who's behind the scenes helping to get it built right now?
Well, I mean, it's a very expansive way to say what I do. I don't think I have that much impact at all. It's also just a very broad question.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of great things in the ecosystem. There's a lot of great projects. Again, like the rate of innovation, I think, is what just impresses me so much, and what I just want to see more and more and more of. Like, let's go back to the liquidity baking as an example, right? I think this is a really interesting and pretty phenomenal idea. And not just that, but it's also been the centerpiece that spawned other very interesting ideas. So, like, what Use is doing is pretty cool. And I think, like, who's to say what's going to be the right dApp to build, or the next interesting thing? I don't know. But the fact that people keep innovating so much is how we're going to find the cool stuff. So the ecosystem from that perspective is in a really good spot. And I just hope that innovation keeps happening.
You think that that's something specific to the people working within the Tezos community, or is that something across the crypto world as a whole?
Yeah, like, I mean, going back to like our first couple of minutes, like, I got to be honest, I'm fairly new to the blockchain world in such a deep way, and so I don't have the insight to every other project and every other
Of course.
protocol out there, right? But when you take a look, I think, yeah, it's something pretty special going on here, and I'm excited to see such a smart group of people working on so many things.
So in terms of that, like, your choice, obviously at some point you made the choice, like, it's going to be Tezos. That's the one that I want to get involved with. This is how I'm going to make my move into this world, is working with Tezos specifically. Can you tell us what was it about Tezos and this ecosystem and this community that was attractive to you?
Yeah, I'm always aligned towards tech. That's been my entire life since I could pick up a textbook. Whether it's hardware, whether it's programming, whether it's biotech, I love technology, and so like that's kind of where the bulk of my decision came from. In terms of as much as I had a choice per se, right? Like it's just an incredible opportunity, and I was like, this is what I want to do. But I think on-chain governance, you can't underestimate what a profound idea that was, and how not just in like isn't it cool, but how completely meaningful that is. And I think that's something really incredible. And for me, therefore, that is the tech that I wanted to work with. And we can go into other things too, like, formal verification. There's a lot of other stuff that can be very interesting to discuss. But I think for me personally, the keystone is the on-chain governance. I think it's extremely exciting.
Absolutely. Now, as someone who's like openly involved in this space, I often get approached with questions about crypto and blockchain. And I've been getting approached recently by people talking about there's sort of this narrative emerging about the proliferation of new coins and new tokens in the space as a signal that somehow the market is overvalued and a signal that we're due for a fall. What would you tell somebody who came to you with those kind of concerns?
I mean, I'm not sure what their concern would be, right? Like if you're taking the technology angle, right, then this is kind of a normal cycle in that what you see initially, like let's take like 3D printing, which has kind of gone through a couple of more hype cycles, but it's still one of those like interesting techs.
A great example.
Right. Yeah. So like, I actually worked on some 3D printing patents as part of a thesis back in the day. But initially when like people started thinking about this again, and like bear in mind it also had its origins way back in the 70s from like jewelry manufacturing and stuff. But when it became like distributed manufacturing was the buzzword of the hour, like you saw ideas non-stop, some interesting, some not so great, some like fanciful, and some very real. And then you saw an emergence of thousands and thousands of companies who were going to like 3D print absolutely everything, and like there wouldn't be a thing you'd own that wasn't 3D printed.
Yeah.
Right? And like no, I mean there are some obvious use cases for 3D printing and some very good ones that make a ton of sense. But what happens is over time the really great technologies stick around, and the really good use case technology fits stick around, and then a lot of the kind of like other ideas just kind of fizzle out. But it's pretty normal in tech when you have like a massive innovation to see floods of
Absolutely.
kind of like side innovations come along, and some that are differentiated by nothing but marketing. But I think if you find the tech that really works, that really makes sense, and the one that starts to find like use cases that fit that tech, that's where the longevity exists. So I mean, I'd kind of go to that parallel. So in terms of concern, like I don't know, I'm not sure what they're concerned about. Like it's tech.
Well, this is one of the things that we've sort of seen all the way along, is that people are always looking for a reason to discount it and a reason to write it off and to talk about the problems of it. And despite that, the larger ecosystem continues to grow, investment continues to come into the space. People like you are making the jump from other areas of tech into crypto and blockchain. This is all continuing to happen, and yet we're sort of continually subjected to these ways to sort of write the whole thing off, right?
Sure, and like as with any innovation path, right? There's probably some things along the journey of blockchain innovation that deserve a write-off. They weren't good ideas. They were they didn't stand the test of time. But there's definitely some that will and do. And I think that's kind of the way to look at this. Like innovation isn't a perfect beast. It has its directions that it needs to go. But this circles back around to NFTs. For me, that's a very clear use case of blockchain technology that makes a tremendous amount of sense. And it makes a lot of sense in a load of directions. You could write that off by saying like, oh, well, it's just collectibles and that can inherently be fatty. It kind of is dismissive because it looks at the very narrow use case of it and says like, well, that could be a fad, sure, right? And there are probably some fads within NFTs that won't stand the test of time, but there's definitely a lot that will. So I mean, I personally believe that like fine art is a fantastic example of a use case of NFTs that solves a lot of problems, some latent needs and some that were just painfully obviously there, and has a ton of longevity associated to it. Like that is not going to go away as far as I think.
I completely agree with you. I think people like me who are historically collectors, like those aspects of the NFT space make more sense than it does to those who are not collectors and are not sort of familiar with the idea of collecting and collecting art.
Right.
And it has been. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say that's just like one use case, right?
Yeah.
And over time, these use cases that have longevity get collected, and before you know it, in another 5 years, hopefully we can sit down against you, and we can talk about the next 10 use cases that emerge there and how they're all here to stay. And before you know it, you'll get to a point where there's such a large pool of use cases that it is every day that everyone uses the blockchain in some way.
Fabulous. We're getting toward the end here. It's time to announce the winner of today's Tezos branded nano ledger. Today's lucky viewer is at Johnny Little Ears. Congratulations at Johnny Little Ears. To claim your ledger, just email us at social@tezoscommons.org. We'll request a screenshot to verify that you're the account owner, and then you can get your new ledger over to you as quick as you can. For those who missed out this week, we remind you that there's one available each and every week here on the TezTalks live stream, so keep tuning in. Mason, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been a really interesting chat. It's always awesome to speak to the folks kind of working behind the scenes, building out this ecosystem and keeping Tezos at the forefront of the blockchain revolution. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we sign off here?
No, I mean, again, you honor me too much. That's not me, that's everyone else, right? That's all the cool dApps and cool projects, kudos to them. They're doing the great stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for the time. It's been awesome to catch up, and hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. To everyone out there in Tezos land, thanks for joining us on the TezTalks live stream. I'm Stu from the Tezos Commons, and our awesome guest has been Mason Edwards from the Tezos Foundation.